guys, MTech Guy here, and today we're going to take a look at changing out a rear suspension arm on the E60 M5. So it's one of the guide links. It's part of the rear suspension. It's the upper front arm. Now sometime in the future I do plan to rebuild all of the front and the rear suspension components, but everything's functioning really good at the moment. It's not really worn out, so it would be a bit redundant to go through and do the whole job just now. Even though it is great to get all of your suspension refreshed, it's not really necessary at this time on my car. It's a bit of a waste of money. And the rear suspension arm that we're going to look at changing out today, it's not exactly worn out. The joints are okay, but what's happened, the ball joint at the outer end has a split boot, so it's spewing grease everywhere. So it's also letting moisture in, so that ball joint's going to eventually deteriorate much faster than the rest of the suspension. Now initially I was going to just try and replace the boot itself with like an aftermarket generic one. Pretty straightforward to do on these arms, but I couldn't find one in the correct size, so what I did in the end, I just bought an arm. I managed to get one relatively cheap. So in today's video we're going to look at just changing out the arm itself. Now usually if you've got one that's failed, I'd recommend replacing both sides, but as mine's not worn, it's just the boot that's failed, the other side's fine. Just going to look at replacing the one arm today. Alright, so let's go and take a look at the part itself. Alright, so this is the replacement arm that we're going to be fitting today. It's a Lemforder brand. This is an OEM arm, so I'd recommend going for a genuine BMW one or a Lemforder one. So of course we've got the ball joint on one end and the rose type bush on the other one. Now there are cheaper alternatives available, but normally they just come with a regular rubber bush at the end here. Now this is a rose type joint, so it is worth going for a Lemforder or genuine BMW one. Now the one I got fitted to the car at the moment, this rubber boot has split and it's spewing out all the grease and also letting water and dirt in there, so it's going to prematurely wear that ball joint and it's going to start getting loose. So I'm just going to replace the whole arm today, and then whenever the time comes in the future I'm going to go through all the suspension and replace any arms and bushes and bits and pieces to give it a freshen up, but we're not at that stage in the car's life just yet. Now another thing to be aware of with these arms, for the E60 M5 and the M6s of the same generation, this fitting here changed. So there's 3 different types, so you want to make sure that you match the part number against your VIN, and when it comes to fit the new arm to the car, once you've got the old one removed, just double check that it is like for like before you go fitting the new one. Alright, so let's get this thing fitted to the car. So first things first, before we get into it, we need to take a measurement from the very top point of the rear wheel arch lip there to the centre of the centre cap. We take a look at that. Looking, it's about 353 millimeters. So we'll make a note of that because we're going to need that measurement later on. Right, so next up we're going to get the rear of the car jacked up, get the rear wheel removed. Alright, so if we take a closer look here, you can see we've got the arm that's going to get replaced today. If we look down there, you can see that ball joint's just spewing grease everywhere, making a bit of a mess, and at the same time getting moisture in there and wear prematurely over time. So that's why we're replacing this arm today, but otherwise everything's still nice and tight. There's no excessive play in it. It'd be good to get it changed out now before it does start to deteriorate, and the rest of the suspension arms throughout the rear end are all good. So we'll just focus on this arm today. So before we get carried away diving in and pulling out the old arm, the first thing we need to do is mark the position of this eccentric bolt here. So the purpose of this eccentric bolt is that if you look here, it's got an offset, almost cam-shaped washer behind the head of the nut. It's all as one. So what happens is as you turn this and it sits in these grooves here, it'll push this arm in and out into a different position, and then that's what sets your rear wheel toe. So in an effort not to disrupt the wheel alignment too much, what we're going to do is just mark the position of that, and then we'll just make sure that we put it back in exactly the same position when we reassemble everything. So if your nut on the other end is looking a bit rusty, just be aware that once you have marked it, you don't want to go spraying it all down with WD-40 or anything, because it's likely to dissolve the mark there from your permanent marker, and then you'll lose the position. So if you live in a climate where rust is an issue, you just want to make sure you focus the WD-40 or your penetrant on the nut at the other end. Try and keep this dry so we can keep that mark legible for when we come to reinstall the new arm. So I'm using a permanent marker here. There we go. So we'll start off by removing the eccentric bolt first. So we're going to be undoing the nut at this end with a 16mm spanner, and then counter holding the head of the bolts also with a 16mm spanner. Before we slide the bolt out, well, there is a eccentric washer to remove off the front side of the bolt there. That's a little bit tight in there, so you might need a flat blade screwdriver just to ease it off. There we go. That's what it looks like, and you can see that it's shaped. So same as the shape behind the head of the bolt there, the offset washer looking piece. It's the same at the other end, so the bolt will move around evenly to set the wheel alignment. Now we can slide this bolt out gingerly. Now we don't want to damage the threads getting out, so you may need to unload the top of the arm slightly just by pushing on the brake disc. There we go. And now we can move on to the ball joint end. We'll take a look at removing the ball joint end. So we're going to use a 16mm spanner on the nut. And then we're going to counter hold the stem of the ball joint with a 7mm spanner. Right, now to make my life a little bit easier and to speed the process up a bit, now that we've got the nut broken free there, what I'm going to do is use a 16mm ratcheting ring spanner, and I can whip that nut off easily while still holding it with the 7mm ring spanner. Just saves having to continually remove the 7mm backwards and forwards. That should slide out relatively easy. You shouldn't need a pickle fork or a ball joint splitter for that one, because it's not really sitting on a taper like a regular old school ball joint. So that's what we've got there. Right, so if we take a look at the old and the new side by side, you can see with the old one that ball joint boot's completely wrecked, completely split and come apart. It's spewing grease all over everything. So that would have been letting moisture in there and dirt and debris, which would have caused the ball joint to wear prematurely. Now it is still pretty tight, but eventually that would have started to get a bit looser and looser and then cause a bit of rear end slop with the E60 M5. The other end doesn't look too bad. And of course we've got the new one here, and this one feels much tighter being brand new. You can see it's certainly going to be a big improvement. All right, let's get the new one fitted to the car. Right, so the end we're going to fit the ball joint in at the hub carrier here. There's a lot of grease and dirt there, so I'm going to give that a good clean off before we install the new part. Bit of brake clean will do the job. So we'll fit the ball joint end first, and then that'll give us a chance just to rotate the arm up into position into the subframe bracket. Install the nut. And we'll just get a regular ring spanner to tighten this one up in position. There we go. And now we can manoeuvre the other end of the arm in position and slide the eccentric bolt through. So now that the bolt's in, I'm going to rotate it just to get our alignment marks somewhere close. There we go. Install the washer. And make sure the washer's seated in its groove in the subframe there. Install the nuts. So we'll just pull all this up sort of finger tight, and then we'll get that alignment spot on as close as we can. There's not much room around here to swing a spanner, so just have to do it in incremental movements. Right, so that's finger tight now. It's ever so slightly pinched, but we haven't done it up, so there'll be enough slack there just to move that head of the bolt round to align the alignment marks now. There we go. But before we tighten the nut down completely, first we need to lift this arm up into its regular ride-out position, otherwise we're going to load up this joint here and the whole thing's going to be twisting and under load once it's in its regular position rather than its unloaded position like it is now. So what we're going to do now is position the jack under the hub and just raise that up, and then we'll use our measurement that we took at the beginning of the video from the centre of the hub there to the top edge of the rear wheel arch lip. Right, so let's see what we've got here. It's about 410. I'll go up a little bit more. Still a bit more to go, so we're looking for 353 mil. So we'll recheck the alignment mark, which still looks good. So now we can pull it up. There we go. Alright, so now we can let that back down slowly. That's the arm now replaced. There we go, that looks better. Nice fresh ball joint with an intact boot at this end. Yeah, so even though it cost me a little bit of extra money, I think I'm pleased I just put a new arm in there rather than trying to mess around replacing the rubber ball joint boot on the old one. Much better. Right, so now we can put the wheel back on, drop it back down on its wheels, torque the wheel bolts up, and that's the job done. Alright guys, so there we have it. That's how you go about changing the rear suspension guide link arm on your E60 M5. If you found the video interesting or useful, don't forget to give it a like, and make sure you go and check out the rest of my YouTube channel for more BMW E60 M5 content. Consider subscribing if that's your cup of tea. I'm MTech Guy. Thanks a lot for watching.